I have one more recipe for you guys using the puff pastry I made a couple months ago. This one is called what is known as a Parisian Flan or flan pâtissière, and it's basically just puff pastry with pastry cream or creme pâtissière in the inside. It is so good. So first I'm going to make a really thick pastry cream. And by really thick, I mean I'm using both cornstarch and egg yolks. Traditionally in a pastry cream, you really only need egg yolks. Sometimes use a little bit of cornstarch, but to use so many egg yolks and so much cornstarch really is going to be good for something that is baked instead of something that's like going in a tart or an eclair. Then I've got some milk and cream and sugar that's going in a small saucepan. I also have a vanilla bean. I'm going to scrape the seeds out and then put the whole bean into the cream as well. If you want to just use vanilla paste or vanilla extract, that's okay. But because this dessert is really just a vanilla pastry cream encased in puff pastry, the vanilla is a really key flavor. So I think using a really high quality vanilla is very valuable and worthwhile. I also have a little bit of butter that will be added at the very end, so that can just set aside for now. Now, of course, this is a pastry cream. So first I'm going to warm up the cream, milk, sugar, vanilla mixture until it is hot, but not scalding, not boiling, nothing like that, just warm. The sugar has dissolved. Then I'm going to pour some of it over the egg yolks and cornstarch and then temper that mixture back into the saucepan where I will continue to whisk it until it becomes really thick and creamy. Now for this, I'm actually not going to be using a thermometer or anything to check this. I'm just looking for the consistency. That is because for an unglaze, it's basically like a thickened cream. Once you reach that unglaze stage where it's still very loose and creamy, but it has thickened a bit, that hits about like 70 to 80 degrees. Then once you have achieved that temperature, we've already cooked the eggs long enough. This is already safe to eat. It is going in the oven later anyway. So you can use a thermometer for this mixture, but what we are going for is for this mixture to thicken and then just barely start to like bubble at the like very bottom. So you will know when it is done, even if you are not using a thermometer. Once we get to that stage, we really need to take it off the heat immediately or it will start burning. Also, with this kind of a thing, you want to be whisking it pretty constantly. In the very beginning, when it's still super loose, you could let it sit just for a little bit between times when you are whisking. But because I have the egg yolks and cornstarch in here, once it thickens up, it's going to thicken quite quickly. And so to make sure that all of the cream and egg yolks and all of that is really, the heat is evenly distributed, everything is really constantly moving throughout the saucepan. I don't want just the bottom to be cooking and like thickening without the top part cooking and thickening, which is why I'm making sure to just have like constant motion in here. As you can see, it is a little bit frothy at the top because I am whisking this so constantly. If that makes you nervous, you can use a spatula and just make sure that you are really still getting a lot of motion in your saucepan. However, it is going to go away as soon as this thickens. All of that foamy stuff is going to disappear. And if you are still concerned about it later, you always can run this through a very fine mesh sieve after you've emulsified in the butter, just to make sure it's really silky smooth without any of those air pockets. If you're super worried about it, again, I am not concerned. That is not a worry to me. It's still super thin. So just because of my whisking motions, that is why it's a little foamy at the top. Okay, I don't know if you're noticing this, but it's starting to get thicker and thicker. And from this point on, it's going to go really fast. So keep your eyes on this. I'm going to whiz constantly, making sure I've got all of the, bottom of the saucepan, and I'm scraping around the corners and the edges and sides to make sure everything's incorporated. And look at that. Pastry cream. It looks like pudding. It is super, super thick. You can see now really clearly all of those specks of vanilla bean. It is looking delicious. And there we go. We see a couple little bubbles there of it boiling, and then I know to take it off the heat. I'm going to add in my butter right away after that. Give it a nice little stir first before relatively quickly switching over to my immersion blender. This is something that you can probably do if you just whisk well enough. I don't recommend it. As I mentioned in so many videos, an immersion blender is a vital part of any pastry kitchen. And to get the best, silkiest texture, you absolutely need to use and switch over to an immersion blender. You notice that the color lightened up a lot with both the addition of the butter and the perfect emulsification coming from that immersion blender. Now I'm going to pour it in to a bowl. I'm going to cover this with plastic wrap and get it into my refrigerator to cool completely. At that point, when I poured it into the bowl, if you were nervous about any of the, air bubbles or pockets or the cooking of it at all, you could pass it through a sieve at that point. While that is cooling down completely, I'm going to start working on my puff pastry crust. So I have this puff pastry that I made. You can use store-bought. That is absolutely fine. I have not done this recipe with a store-bought puff pastry, so that is not something I don't know if there would be anything that I would modify about it. This is the first time I've ever made a Parisian flan. So yeah, it was a very new experience for me, and it was delicious. Spoiler alert, it turned out amazing. But there are a couple of things I want to mention as I go here that I might do a little bit differently, because it was my first attempt. It was not absolutely perfect. There are things I would do differently next time, so I want to tell you what I think went really well and what I would do differently. So here I am just getting this really, really thin. I think I was going down to like half a centimeter-ish. I don't know. I was kind of just rolling this to make sure it was long enough. I used some parchment paper to measure the inside, what I would need. I have a springform pan, I think it was a 6-inch pan, and then you can just use the bottom of it to measure the circle that you will need. So I want one big long strip for the outside, and then I want one circle for the bottom. So I just put that strip down. I'm going to use a knife just to cut what I need, and so I'm just going along both edges there, and then I'll go along the sides as well. Depending on how long you've been working with this dough or how long in advance you want to do this, you could actually cut these strips and the circles for the bottom of the tin in advance and then just keep it in your refrigerator if you're going to be using it within a couple hours, or even in your freezer if you are going to use it like the next day or the day after or whenever. So this is something you can really think about and plan and prep for yourself in advance if you're not doing everything all in the same day or two. The next thing I did, I just put that one ring around the outside of my springform pan. I don't know why I do not have footage of this. I might have just filmed it vertically. I'm so sorry, but I literally just laid it in there. I do have a ring of parchment paper between the dough and the springform pan. And then I cut the circle using like the outside marker of my springform pan because I wanted a little bit of overlap. That's why I went in with my pastry brush there with a little bit of water so that I could press the edges of the puff pastry circle from the bottom into the sides and create kind of a seal there to make sure that nothing leaks out later. Then I'm going in and I'm just using my fork to make a bunch of holes in the bottom, and I'm going to put this into my freezer for like 30 minutes so it's really nice and cold when it goes into the oven. So I'm just going to cover it up, get it into the freezer, and then I'm going to bake it later. Now here's one thing that I did that I want to recommend to you to be careful about later because this all went really well. I put some parchment in, I added some beans, you can use rice or baking weights or whatever it is, and then you want to partially bake the puff pastry shell first. I was really nervous about baking it too long and then ending up with like a burnt shell or burnt bottom of my puff pastry, and then my pastry cream like not setting enough on the inside. So I underbaked this part. I know I did. And two reasons why I know that. The very end, I could see a little bit where the pastry cream met the puff pastry, and it was just a little bit kind of soggy right there. I mean, it was still absolutely delicious, but it was noticeable that it wasn't quite baked enough. And then also it looked okay when I put it into the oven again, but it puffed up way too much on the bottom and it came apart kind of on the sides. So again, still tasted delicious, but it wasn't as perfect as it could have been. I know with this same recipe, it could be even better. Now I have this pastry cream that I made the day before now. So it's been sitting overnight in my refrigerator. You can see it's really, really thick, but as soon as I get in there with my whisk, it smooths out really, really nicely. And that is because of, again, all the yolks and cornstarch in there, giving it a really, really thick consistency, but it's still really silky and smooth. So I've got this puff pastry kind of pie shell looking thing here. And now I'm just going in. I'm using a piping bag to help me do this really smoothly. And I'm piping all of my pastry cream in almost to the top, like just a little bit short of the top. And then I'm going in with an offset spatula just to make sure it's all really nice and smooth. And one last thing I'm going to do before putting this in the oven again is to get in there with a little bit of egg yolk. And that is really just to create a really beautiful golden top of this flan. Then back into the oven, this is going to go. We want all of this to kind of cook. Again, the pastry cream is fully cooked as it is, but we want this to bake and instead of be like a very smooth, soft pastry cream, be more of a flan texture, and then add a little bit of color, both to the pastry case, the puff pastry, and the top of the flan there. Here is the end result. It is magnificent. Again, the sides were a little bit more like open and puffy because I don't think I baked it enough initially, but look at all those layers. Oh my goodness, it is just like so gorgeous. Let me cut into this so you can see the inside. Again, you will notice, and let's all just collectively agree to ignore it because I know I did a bad thing. I am not cooking my pastry case enough. But so there is a tiny layer at the bottom that's a smidge underbaked there. Otherwise, it is perfection. There are so many flaky layers. I really should have done like an ASMR version of this because it was just so crunchy and crispy on the outside. And then look at this squish here. Like, look at how perfect this texture of the flan like pastry component is. It was just so jiggly. I couldn't stop touching it. It was amazing. Let me get in here with a fork and let me show you just how smooth and amazing it is. Oh my gosh. It was so tasty. The really intense creamy vanilla flavor with the crunch and crisp part from the puff pastry along the outsides and the bottom. It was really, really good. I'm really excited to play around more with this recipe now that I've given it a try. It worked even though, again, I know I made some mistakes. It was really, really fantastic. And I hope to make some other flavor renditions, see what else I can do with this same technique in the future. If you give this a try, make sure to tag me on Instagram at Maddie Brame. You can also find me on TikTok at Macarons by Maddie, and make sure to subscribe down below so you don't miss out on future videos. Until next time, have a wonderful day. Bye.